What we're going to look at is clear proof. We're going to look at world history. So I'm asking for you to pay really close attention. As more power was given to the Church of Rome, the more power the Pope had. And upon his rise to power, to absolute power, this is what happened in 492 AD. The Heruli, the tribe of Heruli, was destroyed in 492 AD.
No, it really wasn't. Odovacar's kingdom in Italy came to an end in 493 AD, but even so, Odovacar's military was drawn from several barbarian people groups, including the Heruli. Even if the Ostrogoths did slaughter all of Odovacar's forces, their destruction would not have meant the destruction of the Heruli tribe. The Heruli people group maintained their kingdom north of the Danube River into the 6th century. After they lost the kingdom to the Lombards, they eventually began converting to Catholic Christianity around 527 AD. And as a result, they received a settlement in Pannonia from the emperor. We even hear of a Heruli invasion as late as 565 AD that supposedly oppressed all Italy, until the exarch Narses subjugated them.
Then, after the Herulis were wiped out and extinct, came the Vandals. The Vandals were also destroyed, but that was in 534 AD.
Okay, I will agree with you here that the Vandals were destroyed in 534 AD, but I would like to point out that the contemporary historian Procopius, who chronicled the Vandalic War, just so happened to mention the presence of 400 of your extinct Heruli among the Byzantine forces who fought against the Vandals.
And then, eventually in 538 AD, the Ostrogoths were completely wiped out from the face of the earth.
Whoa, hold on there, not even close. Look, the failed siege of Rome was a tremendous setback for the Ostrogoths. I get that. But wiped off the face of the earth? Let's be reasonable here. According to the estimates provided by Procopius and Thomas Hodgkin, the remaining Gothic forces following the siege probably numbered around 45,000 men. The number of Byzantine forces in Italy and Illyria? Roughly 24,000. So, is it fair to say that if the Goths had around 45,000 soldiers following the siege, then you can't exactly say they were wiped off the face of the earth at that time, right? And even if we can't ascertain the exact figures, we can at least know that General Narses recognized the number of Ostrogothic soldiers were still far superior to the Byzantines after the siege of Rome in 538 AD.
These three different tribes were wiped out.
In 538 AD, the Vandals? Yes. The Heruli? No. The Ostrogoths? No.
The main reason particularly was because they chose not to accept this new system of worship. They chose not to accept this new authority that was now ruling over everybody's affairs.
Look, what the Arian tribes did not accept was the Nicene Creed. Arianism among the Germans, except for maybe the Vandals, was more of a cultural religion, a quiet hereditary faith that cultivated group solidarity. It served to differentiate the Germans from the Romans, who the barbarians looked upon as being soft and inferior compared to their own warlike, martial culture. Of course, once the Germanic aristocracy began to see how the benefits of Catholic hegemony far outweighed Arian egotism, they eventually wisened up and switched teams.
The union of church and state.
That wasn't anything new either. The union of church and state had been established by Emperor Theodosius as far back as 380 AD.
These three different Gothic tribes, they rejected to follow this new power.
Again, they rejected Nicene orthodoxy, and in reality, it wasn't because they were against a power of some sort. Their Arianism actually was more like a theological accident than anything else. You see, the bishop who spearheaded the missionary activity among the barbarian tribes in the 4th century just so happened to be Arian, and he had been commissioned by one of the only 2 Arian emperors to rule the Roman Empire throughout the 4th century. Had the commission come from a Catholic emperor, those same Gothic tribes would have converted to the Catholic religion upon their migration to the empire. Also, you said there were 3 Gothic tribes that rejected the new power, but there were more than just 3 Arian tribes. In 538 AD, there were several other barbarian tribes in the west that were Arian, while a number of others practiced their traditional pagan religion.
And as a result, they were wiped out from the face of the earth.
No, they were not. Hey, wait a minute. Destroyed by the Roman Pope? Where are you getting this stuff?
Again, here's the date. The Herulis were wiped out in 492 AD.
No, the kingdom of Odovacar was wiped out, and that was in 493 AD.
The Vandals were destroyed in 534 AD. Then the Ostrogoths were wiped out completely in 538 AD.
Let's see, 45,000 Goths, another 15 years of war. No, not wiped out in 538 AD.
To make things easier to understand, let's connect the points together and look at world history briefly.
Oh good, I can't wait.
In 476 AD, the Roman Empire collapsed. As a result, there was the 10 divisions of land that took place.
As I showed at the beginning of my Sean Boostra video, there were 17 divisions of the Western Empire in 476 AD, not just 10.
At the same time, in 476 AD, Emperor Justinian gave power and authority to the Bishop of Rome, who is the Pope.
Wait, did you just claim Justinian was emperor in 476 AD? And your intention was to briefly instruct your viewers on world history? Right.
That's it. If he can teach a class, he can teach a class. I can teach a class.
By doing this, he was able to bring a union of church and state, a religious and political power united together, working together.
Like I mentioned earlier, the union of church and state was established by Emperor Theodosius when he made the Roman religion the religion of the empire back in 380 AD. That is what united the religious and political powers, not whatever you think Justinian gave the papacy in 476 AD. Not only was Justinian not emperor in that year, he was not even alive at that point in history.
At the same time, let's take note that the Roman Empire was full of paganism. Many pagans that worshipped the sun made up a big chunk of the population of the Roman Empire.
I'm not sure how much sun worship factored into the religious practices of the Roman population in the 5th or 6th centuries. In 476 AD, most Romans were Catholic, and they made up the majority of the former empire's population. The writers I'm familiar with state that the barbarian invaders like the Visigoths and Franks, etc., were in the minority, and out of those tribes, about half had adapted Arian Christianity as their national religion by the time of the fall of Rome. So whatever chunk of the population consisted of actual sun worshippers, it could not have been that large.
By giving power to the Bishop of Rome or to the Pope, then laws were able to be passed that would directly restrict people from worshiping God on a certain day or in a certain way.
Really? What power was given to the Bishop of Rome in 476 AD, and how was this new power responsible for passing the laws you speak of?
And as a direct result, before the Pope arose into total power in 538 AD, laws began to be passed that would change history as we know it. And the laws which were passed did affect many Christians.
I'm familiar with some of the 6th century Byzantine and Gallo-Roman Sunday legislation passed within the period you speak of. However, I am unaware that papal power awarded by an emperor directly resulted in any of it. For example, Justinian's Sunday legislation originated from Roman emperors prior to 476 AD, while the Third Synod of Orleans produced a canon forbidding Sunday agricultural labor in 538 AD. In fact, the Orleans law was in direct opposition to Justinian's, but regardless, in both cases, the Bishop of Rome had absolutely nothing to do with the inspiration, composition, or enactment of either one of those respective laws. So which laws are you referring to exactly?
This law required people to abandon their ways of worshiping God on His holy Sabbath day and to now come to worship on the day of paganism, on the day of sun worship. Amazing point.
Okay, what law are you talking about? I don't know of any Sunday legislation drafted between 476 and 538 AD that specifically required people to abandon seventh-day worship in favor of Sunday. All of the imperial laws Justinian incorporated into Book 3, Chapter 12 of his code recognize Sunday, among other days, as a day of rest from labor, business, and legal affairs, the only exception being agricultural labor. Those laws did not address the concept of abandoning worship on the Sabbath day for worship on Sunday. Is there some other book in the code that expressly forbids seventh-day worship? If so, where?
So now I have just brought to your attention that this papal authority changes times and laws.
Wait, stop. You've thrown around a number of general claims about Sunday laws and restricting days of worship without giving any specific examples or even explaining how the Bishop of Rome was involved. And now you're just asserting that the Pope was responsible for all of it? Where's the evidence?
How did it change times? Well, let's examine.
Oh, okay, so you're going to take us through an examination of all your evidence. Alright, I guess I got all worked up for nothing. Please, continue.
The Christians used to worship God on his holy Sabbath day. And let's take note that also on the Sabbath day, on the 7th day of the week, the Jewish people also worship on the 7th day of the week, on the Sabbath. Then, when this papal authority came to take place and now is emerging into complete power, laws began to be passed that forced people to leave their worship on Sabbath and to come and worship now on a day of paganism, on a day of worshiping the sun, on a false day of worship.
Hold on. You're repeating some of the same unsupported claims we heard just a few minutes ago. Where is this examination you spoke of? You're supposed to be explaining how the papacy in particular was responsible for changing the times. Which pope? What laws? Connect the dots, provide details, anything.
Eventually in 538 AD, the Pope now took possession of the city after he was decreed to be the head of all the Christian churches.
What? Took possession of Rome in 538 AD? Sure, Justinian reaffirmed papal primacy in one of his letters, but that was in 533 AD, and the letter said nothing about the emperor giving the Pope possession of the city of Rome. 18 years later, the Ostrogoths, who you say were extinct, returned and retook the city after 2 successful sieges, one in 546 AD, the other in 549.
Now, in 538 AD, the world entered into a new era. This new era is known as the Dark Ages.
Well, I know of one historian who credited 538 AD with commencing the Middle Ages, but that's it. He also did not connect the start of this new era with the papacy or the Catholic Church.
And the reason why it is called the Dark Ages was because that is the age when persecutions took place.
No, that was not the reason at all. The term Dark Ages was originally coined by men like Francesco Petrarch and Leonardo Bruni. They considered 476 AD to be the starting point because they saw the classical age of Rome terminating with the rapid decline of Roman literature and culture thanks in part to the barbarian invasions. The Dark Ages originally had nothing to do with the papacy or the church. It was only after the Reformation that Protestants began using the term Dark Ages as a way to denigrate Catholicism. But that is not how the term was originally applied.
Mass persecutions took place to true believers in the Word of God. The Christians who refused to convert to a day of paganism, to the day of sun worship, they were put to death. They were persecuted.
Sunday was a standard day of worship within Christendom long before Justinian or 538 AD. Justin Martyr claimed Sunday was the norm for the church as far back as the 2nd century. E.W. Moeller mentioned how both Saturday and Sunday were used for corporate worship around the 4th and 5th centuries. You say people were put to death for refusing to convert to Sunday worship, but when did this happen? Who were these martyrs you speak of? In the 4th century, I know that Emperor Constantine issued an edict requiring Sunday rest throughout the empire, but violating that law was met with employment loss and confiscation of property, a policy Emperor Justinian later continued. There was nothing in the edict demanding the death penalty. The Third Council of Orleans I mentioned earlier forbade Christians from performing Sunday agricultural work within the Frankish territory. However, the bishops decreed that the penalty for breaking their canons would not be determined by the civil authorities, but by themselves. Around 603, Pope Gregory the Great wrote an epistle to the Romans warning them against observing the Jewish Sabbath, but again, death was not given as a penalty. I'm sure you are at least familiar with Fox's Book of Martyrs, a book that was certainly not friendly to the Catholic Church. But even Fox made the curious statement that after Constantine, for the space of 1,000 years we read of no set persecution against the Christians until the time of John Wycliffe. Jean Crespin, a 16th century Protestant martyrologist, was a bit more critical, recognizing that a few pious persons here and there opposed the temporal and spiritual tyranny of the popes before the time of Wycliffe. But again, he makes no mention of mass persecutions before the 14th century. If you add the Cathars and Waldenses into the mix, we're still talking about a 700-year absence of set papal persecution between the 6th and 13th centuries. Malcolm Lambert tells us that the first heresy burning in the West was ordered by a French king no earlier than the 11th century. Look, here's the bottom line. From claiming Justinian empowered the Pope 6 years before he was even born, to insisting the Ostrogoths were wiped from the face of the earth in 538 AD, or the Pope possessing Rome in that same year, or mass persecutions for refusing to convert to the day of sun worship. A lot of the history you presented in your video was, well, a complete mess. Now, I'm not Catholic, so I really don't care whether or not you believe the papacy is the little horn. I don't have a dog in that hunt. But all I ask of you and your fellow Adventists is please, please stop making stuff up. And don't stand in front of a captive audience or in front of a camera instructing people on aspects of history that you really know nothing about. I encourage you to study the subject matter and gain a thorough understanding of it first. That way, your views will have a better chance of reflecting the historical record, and you will be far less likely to lose your audience by teaching things that make absolutely no sense.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Is that the way you say it? That's a bingo.
You just say bingo. Bingo! How fun! That's a bingo.